Well, volatility's high, but technically we're the last week of summer, and we've got a lot of topics we're going to be covering today. And we've just come off NVIDIA earnings. Have we reached the top in the stock market or not? Well, stick around because this is the trade-off. Well, hey, traders, my name is Blake Morrow of Forex Analytics. And as you can see, obviously I'm not Chris Weston, but don't worry, he'll be back next week. He is traveling abroad, so he couldn't do the broadcast today, but that's okay because we've got, who do we got today? We got Mr. Quasar from Hacienda de Quasar. Let's bring him on in. Quasar, how are you?
Hi there, Blake, coming live from La Hacienda. Super happy to be here and doing great. Yeah, I mean, got another opportunity to be back on the big stage. As you mentioned, Chris, traveling in an undisclosed location. No, I'm kidding. He's doing events and got the opportunity to be back on the trade-off in English, and super happy to be here.
I love it. We love it having you here, and I know our traders do too. And if you do enjoy Quasar and his analysis, make sure you jump down in the comments below. Let him know how much you appreciate him standing in for our big man, Westy. Westy, don't worry. We got your back. Well, Quasar, we should probably, because there's so much to discuss, and I want to ask you how you're trading and navigating the markets. But before I do that, I'm just going to say, let's jump into the market pulse and let's talk about all these different topics we've got going on, because there's a lot and it's summer. So let's get into it. Well, I would be amiss if I didn't ask you, Quasar, how have you been navigating the low liquidity environment that we're dealing with right now? I mean, it's low liquidity, but volatility is still pretty high. How have you been treating it?
I'll say it this way, with caution. I've been quite cautious to be honest. Especially, I'm quite sure that we get to take into more specifics about this when we mention about the risk, but when it comes to August, September, I'm a big believer in seasonality, and of course, I had a feeling that it was a time to be cautious. There were a couple of things, especially from the economic side point, urging for caution, at least on my perspective, and that's how I've been navigating recently.
Well, I think what you're trying to say is you haven't been using like 10 times leverage or anything like that in these markets. You've been paring back your position sizes because those swings have been really big, especially with volatility so high and liquidity so poor. We're seeing some really wide ranges of movement, which is it's a trader's paradise. But that begs the question, especially right now. The dollar had been under assault over the last couple of weeks. We've seen it just come. It hit fresh 2024 lows just yesterday. Now today in North America, we've bounced a little bit, and I suspect
a breather.
Yeah, it is. Okay, there we go. We did have, now let's understand, we're at the end of the month, and we had some corporate end of month, as one of my colleagues puts it, value date. He's an old school bank trader. Value date buying. We had some dollar buying coming through the markets today. But overall, the end of month, most banks are positioning themselves for some dollar selling. Is the dollar selling over? I mean, do you buck that trend? You obviously said we're having a little bit of a breather, but expand on those thoughts.
I personally believe that I think we have to be following the trajectory, right? And I think when we can pinpoint this to the beginning of the month, August, and what we got to observe from the labor market. And yeah, there were a couple of initial claims that alleviate a little bit, but then we got to have the revision. And when we take even a further step back, like the trajectory that we have been showing in the labor market, it's one that begs for caution, and one that I feel that is starting to set up in a trajectory that we have to be careful when it comes to the dollar. And I still believe that there's room to the downside. I'm not calling for it to be dropping majestically, but I still believe that there's still room to the downside. That's how I've been navigating. I'm a firm believer that you also have to, at some point, match it with what's happening outside. And it's not the Fed the only one that it's adjusting to rate cuts. Yeah, we had been pricing it before with a more hawkish standpoint than other entities, but now we have already put it on to a more dovish standpoint, and the other ones are still in the normalizing trajectory, if you will. So I believe that we are still going to be depending on how this trajectory is not playing in favor of the dollar, but eventually should mitigate?
Well, I was pretty much in favor of selling. I'm in favor of selling rallies. It's been my stance since over the weekend. Actually, coming off of the Powell speech at Jackson Hole, he really, he pretty much opened the door for obviously a September cut. How big the cut's going to be depends on the labor market and the non-farm
100%.
payroll next Friday. So obviously, you got to be around next week on the trade-off, because we're going to be discussing the intricacies of what we're going to be looking at as far as the jobs go, because we're going to start seeing a picture of that going into next week. But I do believe that you're right. The trajectory is lower. We got to respect the fact that the trend is down. Today's buying might have been just a little bit of a breather due to some corporate month end. But, it's going to be really interesting when we jump topics, which I'm not going to do just yet. But when we jump topics, we start going about talking about the risks ahead. I really want to expand a little bit more on some of these dollar thoughts. But let's talk a little bit about your topic that you wanted to discuss. Is the big kahuna. It was like the Oscars with watch parties and everything on NVIDIA earnings. So what do you have to say about what you saw today?
It's really, really concerning. That's how I'm going to start this topic, because, Blake, this to some degree brings me some memories of what I had to do. Not too long ago, I got to be covering Google's earnings reports, and quite similar. A report that on the overall beat expectations, both on the top, on the bottom line, and nonetheless, it's not enough. So then my next question is where is this market price to, like, to perfection plus one? And I think, like, just to bring into consideration, I think this was the most relevant event of the week. And when it comes to the report, NVIDIA beating it on the top line, generating $30 billion on the second quarter. Just to have this into perspective, growing above 100% on an annual basis, it's not enough. And we're seeing the stock dropping 7%. So to me, it's like, could there be some bigger underlying weakness coming in the market? I don't know how you are observing this situation, Blake.
Well, that's it. First of all, as far as, the stock is down 7%. I believe it is priced to perfection. One of the things that I think traders need to focus on, especially if you're looking at earnings, watch those margins. Those margins were really wide. They were near like 80%. They dropped to like 75%, I think. And, revenue expectations moving forward might not be as optimistic as people believe. But here's going to be the key. Watch price action tomorrow. NVIDIA undoubtedly is going to be down. NASDAQ's going to be down. But can the rest of the market pick up the slack? And do we see rotation or not? Because when it's broad-based selling, that's one thing. But if it's just rotation, which we've seen in the past, this is a very bullish market. We've seen it bounce back. We're only a hop, skip, and a jump from all-time high. So watch that rotation going into tomorrow. I think that's going to be key. Now, what also is going to be key, Quasar, is all the risks ahead. And the reason I want to discuss these, not because you don't know them. Everybody should know them. You got U.S. election season. You got Middle East situation that's obviously between, the U.S. put on a nice little dog and pony show during the DNC, trying to get some good headlines of peace negotiations or peace talks. That failed miserably. Those have escalated a little bit. You've got Ukraine, you got Russia. Then you've got seasonal factors where September is just not a good month to be in equities as a whole. But my question to you is, again, we understand what most of the risks are. Maybe there's some out there that I'm not mentioning. But what do you think, and who do you think the beneficiary would be if equities move lower? Because I'm not 100% sold that the dollar is going to be that safe haven currency. But what are your thoughts about the risks that are coming ahead over the next month?
Yeah, I think definitely we have to bring into consideration, admittedly, the seasonality factor of things. I think when we get to put this three into perspective, and I strongly agree that those are the most relevant, I will put seasonality. Like August, as a matter of fact, shouldn't be that bad. It's not a month that is typically one where we get to see growth in the risk side of things. But September is the one where, people come back from vacations, from the holidays, from taking a break, and they start readjusting. And like we're heading into September with an economic backdrop that has urged some caution. So I think that's the big one. And then after that, I will put the U.S. election, especially on the fiscal front. It's not selling right now, being fiscally responsible, but that could potentially be one that eventually is going to be knocking on our door. So I think that that's another one to have heavy attention towards it. And on the geopolitical side of things, I mean, I just consider those to be a little bit of landmines. You never know when it's gonna explode, but this is something that you have to always have on your radar. And that's kind of like how I'm navigating those risks. Like,
well, before we jump into PCE, which is going to be the last, like the last thing that we're looking at this week, and I do want to talk about it obviously really quickly, but you brought fiscal responsibility. It doesn't matter which candidate you're looking at going into the November elections. Maybe if you wonder why the dollar might underperform, maybe because you're looking at your choices, your two choices of presidential candidates, which fiscally both of them should be fairly irresponsible. So maybe that is going to be what weighs on the dollar. But what could maybe help the dollar? Let's talk about the PCE really quick. What are you looking at as we go into the end of the week?
Well, I'm going to bring to you a very relevant statistic. Since July 2023, since July last year, we hadn't seen a raise in the core numbers for the PCE. It is expected that this Friday, we're going to see a raise on this metric. Now, definitely when we take a step back and see what has been happening, it seems like we have fully or almost fully transitioned from the inflation risk to the labor market risk. Now, and as a matter of fact, what we got to hear from Jerome Powell, on Jackson Hole, Mary Daly at the beginning of the week, it all seems to be aligning more heavily towards the labor market. But could this be something that brings a complication into the orientation to the labor market? How are you navigating this situation, Blake?
Well, first of all, I think that sets up expectations of very high expectations for the dollar going to the end of the week. The good news is with PCE, you're taking in several different factors, whether it's CPI, producer prices, durable goods, everything factors into the PCE. So estimates usually aren't too far off of what we actually get for a final number. But I do think it could be something that could have a big impact on the markets and Fed expectations, rate expectations as we wrap up into the end of the week. But if you want to know how to trade it and what we're looking at, I think you should stick around for That's a Setup. So Quasar, let's get into it. All right. Well, Quasar, I'm gonna kick things off as normally Westy would, but I want to talk about the sterling because boy, oh boy, this is a breakout. And this is a big breakout too. I couldn't zoom in any further to get a daily chart to get like the capitulation low we saw during when Liz Truss put forth the budget and the sterling traded to parity in Asia a couple years back, and then we've rallied since. But now we've actually broken out above 131.40. And as you can see, daily RSI is rolling over a little bit, and we're coming right back towards that 131.50 level. However, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I do feel that the dollar is on its heels right now, and it's on its back foot. And I think that that's going to be a great pivot to play off of if we dip down to 131.50 in the next 24 to 48 hours, maybe even following PCE. Now, the reason why I put this as a setup, because frankly, we should sustain a breakout above 131.40. If we break back below it, that's going to be a false breakout on the upside on the week, which is going to be a setup for a short going the opposite direction. So I think this is going to be a great pivot. I'm playing on the long side in this particular pair, but again, it's a setup. I think you could trade it short. And if you're bearish, you probably want to wait for it to drop below 131.20, 131 before you get too aggressive. Anyway, that's my first setup. What's yours?
It to some degree falls in line with what we have been talking about the dollar. And yeah, here I have the DXY, Blake, and here's the situation. And when we get to see the price action since mid last year, it had been going nowhere. It was not until the labor market brought that weakness handed by the perspectives of higher rate cuts that we got to break down. When we got to interact previously with the resistance of this configuration in the upside, we were navigating all that fear from the elections in Europe with all that was happening in France. That, of course, ended up going nowhere. Those risks were mitigated. And then from there on, it was the landfall of the dollar. As I mentioned, given by the situation in the labor market and all that was brought with it, the recessionary fears and, of course, monetary policy that got to be more heavily on the cuts side of things. I'm still believing that there is room to the downside. I think we have to follow the trajectory of the economic data, and I feel like we are starting to enter in a dynamic that is gonna probably get a little bit worse before it starts getting better. And in that path, I think there's still room to the downside. I'm looking for intermediate support level at around 100, and with the potential to continue towards a level of 99, which corresponds to the Fibonacci retracement of 6180 of the upside trajectory coming from the lows of 2021.
I love it when we get a triangle break like this, because it's a lot of power wrapped up in consolidation all year, and now we're starting to break down. I love that chart, Quasar. That's going to keep me along the pound dollar, I think. Hey, well, my next setup is going to be the cha-cha-cha. Well, it's actually it's the Euro Mexican peso. I had to come up with some sort of name, and Spanish dance, cha-cha-cha. Well, the reason why I say that is because the Euro Mexican peso, well, let's just put it this way. The peso has a lot working against it right now. You saw the Euro Mex, we just hit 20. We're backing away from there. And I think you can trade this in a couple of different fashions. Obviously, if you're playing it as a carry trade, you can play it back down to that channel support. The channel support, I think, well, first of all, I don't even know if we're going to reach all the way down there. I think we got to consider ourselves lucky if we drop back below 21. But if you get to 2080, 2085, that's where channel support is, and that's where I'm going to be looking to pick it up on the long side. Now, you'll see that blue Fibonacci level that we're kind of on both sides of. That's a long-term 38% retracement. So I feel it's kind of like when you're knocking on a door. My colleague Ryan Littlestone, who does the UK trade-off show, he always talks about resistance, kind of like if you're knocking on a door, you keep knocking, and eventually they're going to open it. So, yeah, the Euro Mex, I think you buy dips down below 21. You could play it on the short side, then play it back up towards 22 again, looking for a breakout, and you do a little bit of a cha-cha-cha.
Cha-cha-cha. Ay, mi peso. Internal joke. The other chart that I wanted to show you guys that I think that has a very interesting setup is the NASDAQ 100, especially after what potentially is going to be the price action tomorrow. And how I'm navigating this chart is one where we have this ascending channel where we recently got to interact with the resistance. And if you go back to those, that period of time, that was when the rotation started taking place, when we got to see the reports from some of the Magnificent Seven, and even though they reported good, it wasn't good enough. They needed to once again beat expectations and by double tap. We have interacted with the resistance. One of the things that I was kind of like hoping for is for it to drop to the 38% level. Didn't happen in this previous dip that took place. As you guys can see now, we are interacting, and seems like we are going to be losing what is now acting as to some degree as a support, which is this Fibonacci expansion level of 100% of the previous positive price structure. So if that's the case, I believe that there's additional potential to have movements to the downside. And I want to be clear when it comes to this. I'm still a believer that there's a lot of potential when it comes to all the thematic that it's involved in the AI space. I just think that maybe we are entering a phase where we can see price coming down, and eventually it could bring very good buying opportunities.
Well, I like it, Quasar. And you know what I love about this show? It's all about actionable ideas. And those are 4 great examples of setups. You have some actionable ideas to take home with you, but don't go anywhere, because we're going to talk about our play of the day, which is our favorite, most actionable setups. So here you go. Well, Quasar, I'm going to go ahead and start off with Euro Swiss. And the reason why I'm doing this is, actually, last week, if you remember one of the setups, I said there's room to the downside. Now, Quasar, you weren't here last week, unless you watched the show. It opened up, right? So the Euro Sterling actually dropped, and we actually hit the 618 retracement today. I like it down here all the way to that broken trend line that comes in right around 93 cents. 93 cents to 93.50. That's where we're currently at. By the way, I'm already starting to get into this trade. Now, something key is happening over the course of the next 24 hours. Swiss National Bank, Jordan, he's going to be talking, and he doesn't talk that often, but he can move the markets. And one of the things that he's been very vocal about, especially at the beginning of 2024, was he didn't like the weakness, and it was the end of 2023. He didn't like the strength, of the Swiss franc, the weakness of the Euro Swiss, and I wouldn't be surprised if he threw a couple of zingers out there, because traders have been flocking to the Swiss franc as a hedge against a lot of these geopolitical risks. So if he pushes back against that, we can see the Euro Swiss rally, from that 93 cent level, or currently where we're at 93.50. So I'm looking for a bounce. Even though I was looking for downside last week, I'm looking for a bounce this week. And that's my play of the day. Quasar, what is yours?
Ay, mi peso, poor mighty peso. Yeah, definitely. I mean, Blake, let's not go too far. It was one of the currencies that was in in everybody's mouth, given that the strong performance that it had been, showing. Unfortunately, when it comes to pretty much this second half of the year, well, starting kind of like in June, the political aspects to Mexico have taken over the previously mighty trajectory that the Mexican peso had been showing, and this is something that recently had got again to it. The main problematic that we are navigating through right now is with all these constitutional reforms that the current government and probably the next government that it's supposed to be taking place here in coming soon, they're trying to take on these actions that could undermine the integrity and the viability. And more specifically, one of the aspects that it's taking place right now, it's on the judicial side of things. And, basically what they're trying to do is that the federal judges are elected by popular decision, not by their credentials. And well, that to some degree has created a lot of uncertainty. We have been seeing the peso being hammered, and that's still not even counting the potential of Donald Trump coming back to the White House. And putting all that together, the political uncertainty and the potential of Donald Trump still maybe coming back to the White House, I think there is some potential room to the upside additional. And well, how I'm going to play, I'm going to wait for a breakout. If we get to lose that psychological level of 20 pesos per dollar, I think there's going to be a continuation, and there's no other significant resistance level until 22. Beautiful trade if it gets to take place. And on top of that, it has a really, really nice risk reward ratio over 3-1. If you put your stop level right below 1950, I think that could be a really good trade. And that's how I'm going to play it this week.
I tell you, Quasar, I'm imagining moving into the election season, and you see, Sheinbaum, you see this upending of the judicial system. It's going to make investors a little nervous. And then just imagine a President Trump, as you're pointing out, President Trump, if he does take office, him having one-on-one meetings with Sheinbaum, he's going to try to push her. And that's going to unnerve Mexican peso investors. That's for sure. So Really great setup. And I'm playing it the same way with the Euromex. So I'm glad we're on the same schedule here. And matter of fact, I'm going to jump over to Hacienda Quasars, and I'm going to maybe have a cerveza with you one of these days. So Quasar, yes, it's been great having you here, and I always enjoy having you here. And it's thank you for stepping in for Chris Weston. If you guys and gals loved having Quasar here, make sure you jump down in the comments below. Give him a thumbs up. It's free to give him a thumbs up. Jump in the comments. And make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of the trade-off episodes as soon as they come out. Also hit that little bell icon, because that notifies you on your desktop or on your mobile device when a new show does come out from Pepperstone. So guys and gals, thanks for joining us this week. Trade safe, and Quasar, good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you as well, Blake. Have a wonderful
Good luck,
day.
everyone.